Rain poured down heavily as pedestrians scurried under umbrellas, and cars splashed through puddles, their headlights slicing through the gloom. On a dimly lit corner, a boy no older than 14 huddled beneath a tattered awning. He wore an oversized hoodie and patched jeans, his hair matted and his face smeared with dirt. This was Eli, a street-smart boy who had learned to survive by staying invisible. But tonight was different. Eli's sharp eyes caught sight of something unusual. Across the street, in front of a high-end restaurant, a sleek black car was parked, its paint glistening under the streetlights. A woman in a fitted trench coat and heels exited the restaurant, her confident stride and elegant demeanor catching the boy's attention. She carried herself like someone who belonged to a different world, a world of wealth and privilege. The woman, Sophia, reached into her designer handbag, pulling out a set of car keys. Eli's gaze shifted to her car. Something wasn't right. Beneath the vehicle, faint streaks of fluid glistened on the wet pavement, forming a thin trail. Nearby, a small wrench lay abandoned on the curb, its metallic surface gleaming under the rain. He'd worked in a mechanic's shop for months before he was forced to leave. He knew exactly what had been done. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the car. Without thinking, he bolted across the street, dodging the traffic, his wet sneakers slapping against the pavement. "Ma'am, wait!" he yelled, catching her attention just as she was about to get into the car. Sophia froze, startled. She turned to face him, her face instantly tightening into a frown. "What do you want?" Eli was out of breath but pushed on, his voice urgent. "You can't drive that car!" Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. "The brakes!" Eli shouted. "Someone cut the brake lines. If you drive, they'll fail." Sophia's eyebrows knitted in confusion. "What? Who are you? Some street kid making things up?" "No! I'm telling you the truth," Eli pleaded, his voice shaking. "Look under the car! Please!" Sophia hesitated for a moment, her skepticism obvious, but she felt a strange sense of urgency in his words. Against her better judgment, she crouched down and peered under the vehicle. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw it, the dark stain of brake fluid spreading out beneath the wheels. Her breath caught in her throat. Eli was right. "What the hell?" Sophia whispered, standing up quickly. Her mind raced. How could she have missed that? Someone had intentionally sabotaged her car. But who? And why? "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eli nodded quickly. "I know this stuff. I used to work in a mechanic shop. That brake line's cut. If you drive, it'll be bad. You won't be able to stop." Sophia's pulse quickened. Her first instinct was to call her husband, Damien, but something felt off. She wasn't sure if she could trust anyone right now. Without thinking, she turned to Eli. "What do I do?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. Eli didn't waste a second. "I can fix it temporarily, but we need to act fast." Sophia blinked. "What?" "I can fix it," he repeated. "Just give me a few minutes. It's not a permanent fix, but you'll be able to drive short distances, just enough to get to a mechanic." Sophia's eyes darted nervously around the street. She couldn't just leave the car here. It was too risky, and there was no time to wait for a tow. "Okay, fine," she said, desperation in her voice. "Do it." Eli wasted no time. He dug through his bag and pulled out a few tools he kept with him. Nothing fancy, just a small wrench and some tape he used for makeshift repairs on the streets. He knelt by the car, his fingers moving quickly and confidently. Sophia watched, a mixture of disbelief and awe washing over her. This kid, this homeless boy, knew what he was doing. Within minutes, Eli had managed to temporarily patch up the cut brake line using tape to seal it, though it wouldn't hold under heavy stress. It was enough for now. He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "It should work for a little while, but you need to get to a mechanic fast." Sophia didn't question it. She opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. Her mind was racing. She didn't know who could have done this, but the feeling of being watched lingered. "Get in," she said quickly. Eli hesitated. "You sure about this?" Sophia's hands were already on the wheel, her foot hovering above the pedal. "I don't have a choice." Eli glanced back at the street before climbing into the passenger seat. Sophia started the engine and the car rumbled to life. The brakes, though temporarily fixed, felt stiff, but they held. She pressed the gas pedal, and the car jerked forward. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Sophia's mind raced. Who would want to tamper with her car? Her thoughts immediately went to Damien, her husband. But that was absurd, wasn't it? "Why were you near my car?" Sophia asked, breaking the tense silence. Eli shrugged. "I wasn't. I just noticed. You get good at spotting stuff when you've been out here long enough." "Out here?" "On the streets," he said plainly, his gaze fixed out the window. "You see things other people don't." Sophia's grip on the wheel tightened. "And what else did you see?" Eli hesitated. "A guy," he admitted. "He was crouched by your car earlier. Looked like he was in a hurry." Sophia's chest tightened. "Did you see his face?" "No," Eli said, "but he drove off in a black SUV. Looked expensive." The color drained from Sophia's face. Her husband owned a black SUV. "Did you get the license plate?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eli shook his head. "Didn't stick around long enough. I just knew something was off." Sophia exhaled sharply, her mind spinning. If Damien was involved, this wasn't just sabotage, it was a warning. As they drove, Eli kept stealing glances at her. Despite her polished exterior, she seemed vulnerable. Her hands were gripping the wheel too tightly, her jaw clenched as if she were holding back tears. "Why would someone mess with your brakes?" Eli asked cautiously. Sophia didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. How could she explain the tangled mess her life had become without sounding insane? "I don't know," she lied. Eli frowned but didn't press further. The tension in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife. Suddenly, headlights flooded the rearview mirror. A black SUV was tailing them, its engine roaring as it closed the distance. Sophia's stomach lurched. "Is that?" Eli began, but he didn't need to finish. The fear in Sophia's eyes said it all. "Hold on," she said, slamming her foot on the accelerator. The car surged forward, splashing through the rain-slicked streets. Eli clung to his seat, his heart hammering in his chest. "What's going on?" "They're following us!" Sophia shouted, swerving around a corner. The SUV matched their every move, its headlights glaring like twin daggers. The chase was on, and neither of them knew how it would end. Sophia's knuckles whitened as she gripped the wheel, her mind racing. The luxury sedan wasn't built for speed, but it responded well enough to her frantic commands. The rain battered the windshield in sheets, and the SUV loomed closer in the rearview mirror. "Why are they after us?" Eli yelled, his voice almost drowned out by the roar of the engine and pounding rain. Sophia didn't answer. She didn't know, or maybe she did but couldn't admit it. The weight of Damien's potential betrayal pressed on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. The SUV inched closer, its massive frame an ominous shadow in the downpour. "Can't this thing go any faster?" Eli shouted, gripping the door handle as the car swerved sharply to avoid a stalled truck. Sophia's jaw tightened. "I'm trying!" The city streets blurred past them in streaks of neon and rain. Horns blared as Sophia wove through traffic, narrowly missing other cars. Every turn she took seemed to lead them into more danger. The SUV's driver was relentless, matching her every move with eerie precision. Eli twisted in his seat, peering out the back window. "They're not giving up." Sophia's chest tightened. She slammed her palm against the steering wheel in frustration. "Why would they?" "Who's they?" Eli asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Sophia didn't answer. She didn't owe him explanations, not yet, but the boy's piercing gaze bore into her, demanding some kind of truth. "Listen, kid," she began, her voice taut with tension. "I don't know what's going on, but I'll get us out of this. Just trust me." Eli gave her a skeptical look but said nothing. Trust was a luxury he'd learned to live without. Suddenly the SUV accelerated, closing the gap between them. It swerved dangerously close, attempting to ram them off the road. "Hang on!" Sophia shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right. The car skidded, its tires struggling for traction on the slick pavement. The SUV missed them by inches, but quickly adjusted, gaining on them again. "They're not stopping!" Eli cried, his voice rising in panic. Sophia's eyes darted to an upcoming intersection. She had one chance to lose them, a narrow alley barely visible in the rain. It was a gamble, but she had no other options. With a quick flick of the wheel, she veered into the alley. The sedan scraped against the tight brick walls, sparks flying as metal met stone. "What are you doing?" Eli yelled, ducking instinctively as the car squeezed through the narrow passage. "Trust me," Sophia snapped, her focus unyielding. The alley opened onto a side street, and for a brief, glorious moment, the SUV was nowhere in sight. Sophia exhaled shakily, her hands trembling on the wheel. Eli slumped back in his seat, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. "Did we lose them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded, although her eyes remained fixed on the rearview mirror. For now. The relief was short-lived. Barely a minute later, the ominous glare of headlights reappeared in the distance. Eli groaned. "They're like cockroaches. What now?" Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't keep running forever. The car wasn't equipped for an extended chase, and she was running out of options. "I have an idea," Eli said suddenly, his voice steady despite the chaos. Sophia glanced at him, startled. "What?" "Take the next left," he instructed. "What are you talking about?" "Just do it." Something in his tone, calm, commanding, made her comply. She turned sharply onto a quieter street lined with abandoned warehouses. "Now what?" "Kill the lights and pull over," Eli said, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Sophia hesitated, her instincts screaming against the idea. But the boy seemed so sure of himself, so certain, that she couldn't ignore him. She turned off the headlights and eased the car into the shadow of a derelict building. The rain continued to pour, masking their presence as the SUV sped past, oblivious to their hiding spot. Eli let out a long breath, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Told you it'd work." Sophia stared at him, a mixture of awe and disbelief in her eyes. How did you know they wouldn't see us?" "People like that don't think," Eli said simply. "They panic. They look for the obvious." Sophia shook her head, still trying to process what had just happened. "Who are you, kid?" Eli shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Just someone who pays attention?" For a moment, the car was silent except for the sound of rain drumming against the roof. Sophia leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. She closed her eyes, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Who were these people? Why were they after her? And why did this scrappy street kid seem to know so much? "You okay?" Eli asked, his voice softer now. Sophia opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. For the first time, she saw past the grime and the ragged clothes. There was something sharp, almost calculating in the boy's eyes, a wisdom far beyond his years. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think you just saved my life." Eli smirked. "Don't mention it." Sophia's lips twitched into a faint smile despite herself. "I'm Sophia, by the way." "Eli," he replied, extending a hand. She shook it, noting how small and cold it felt. "Well, Eli, I think we're in this together now." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean you're going to buy me dinner?" Sophia laughed, a short, brittle sound that felt alien after everything that had just happened. "I think I owe you more than that." As the rain began to ease, Sophia restarted the car, keeping the headlights off as they crept through the quiet streets. "Where are we going?" Eli asked. "To figure out who's trying to kill me," Sophia said grimly. Eli whistled low. "Sounds fun." Sophia shot him a look. "This isn't a game, Eli. If you're going to stay with me, you need to understand that." Eli's smirk faded, replaced by a seriousness that seemed too heavy for his young face. "I get it. Believe me." Sophia nodded, her jaw set. Whoever was behind this, whether it was Damien or someone else, she wasn't going to let them win. But as the car disappeared into the misty night, neither of them realized how deep the danger truly ran. The rain had stopped by the time Sophia and Eli reached a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. Neon lights buzzed overhead, casting a faint blue glow over the cracked parking lot. Sophia parked the car in a far corner, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of the SUV. "You sure this is a good idea?" Eli asked as they stepped out of the car. "We need to regroup," Sophia replied, her voice tense. "And I need answers." The bell above the door jingled as they entered the diner. The place was almost empty, save for a trucker nursing a coffee in the corner and a waitress who barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. Sophia chose a booth at the back, and Eli slid in across from her. The warmth of the diner was a welcome contrast to the cold, wet streets, but neither of them seemed comforted. A waitress ambled over, chewing gum. "What'll it be?" "Just coffee," Sophia said. She glanced at Eli, who hesitated before mumbling, "Burger and fries." Sophia raised an eyebrow but didn't protest. The waitress nodded and shuffled away. As they waited, Sophia leaned forward, lowering her voice. "All right, Eli. Time to talk. Who were those people? And why were they chasing us?" Eli shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "How should I know? You're the one with the fancy car and the enemies." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Don't play games with me. You knew the brakes were cut. You saw the SUV. You know more than you're letting on." Eli hesitated, his bravado faltering under her piercing gaze. "Okay, fine," he said finally. "I've seen guys like that before. They're not amateurs. Whoever sent them means business." "Sent them?" Sophia repeated. Eli nodded. "Yeah, this wasn't random. Someone wanted you dead." The words hung heavy in the air. Sophia's mind immediately went to Damien. She wanted to believe it wasn't him, couldn't believe it, but the evidence was piling up. "Why would someone do this?" she muttered, more to herself than to Eli. "Rich people problems," Eli said with a shrug. Sophia glared at him, but before she could respond, the waitress returned with their order. "Here you go," she said, sliding the coffee and food onto the table. "Anything else?" "No thanks," Sophia said curtly. As the waitress walked away, Eli dug into his burger with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't eaten in days. Sophia, meanwhile, stared into her coffee, her mind racing. "Look," Eli said between bites, "if you're not going to eat, you might as well tell me what's going on. Why would someone want you dead?" Sophia hesitated. She didn't know how much she could trust him, but he had saved her life. That had to count for something. "My husband," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Damien." Eli paused mid-bite, his eyes narrowing. "What about him?" Sophia took a deep breath. "He's controlling, manipulative. Things haven't been good between us for a long time. I was planning to leave him." Eli leaned back, chewing thoughtfully. "And he found out?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "But if he did, this could be his way of sending a message." Eli frowned. "That's messed up." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Welcome to my life." After finishing his meal, Eli pushed his plate aside and wiped his hands on a napkin. "So what's the plan?" Sophia blinked. "Plan?" "Yeah," Eli said. "You're not just going to sit here and wait for them to find you again, right?" Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know. I need to think." Eli shook his head. "Thinking won't help if they show up here. You need to act." Sophia stared at him, surprised by his assertiveness. "And what do you suggest, genius?" Eli smirked. "We need proof. If your husband's behind this, we need to catch him in the act." Sophia frowned. "How are we supposed to do that?" Eli shrugged. "You said he's controlling, right? Probably keeps tabs on you, knows where you are. If we can bait him into doing something stupid, we can expose him." Sophia hesitated. The idea of confronting Damien terrified her, but Eli had a point. She couldn't keep running forever. "All right," she said reluctantly, "but we need to be smart about this." Eli grinned. "Smart's my middle name." Sophia rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. Despite everything, the boy's confidence was infectious. They left the diner and drove to a motel on the edge of town, paying cash for a room. Sophia insisted on using an alias, still wary of being tracked. Inside the room, Eli immediately flopped onto the bed, stretching out with a contented sigh. "Don't get too comfortable," Sophia said, pulling out her laptop. "What are you doing?" Eli asked, propping himself up on his elbows. "Research," Sophia replied. "If we're going to trap Damien, I need to know what we're dealing with." Eli watched as she navigated through emails, financial statements, and other digital breadcrumbs. He was impressed by her focus and efficiency. It was clear she wasn't just some clueless rich lady. "Anything interesting?" he asked. Sophia didn't answer at first, her eyes scanning the screen. Then she froze. "What is it?" Eli pressed, sitting up. Sophia turned the laptop to show him. On the screen was an email from Damien to an unknown recipient sent 2 days ago. The subject line read, "Handle it." Eli frowned. "That's not good." Sophia scrolled through the email. The message was vague but ominous, referencing a problem that needed to be taken care of and promising payment upon completion. "This proves it," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "He's behind this." Eli leaned back, crossing his arms. "So what now? You can't just walk up to him and say, 'Hey, I know you're trying to kill me.'" Sophia clenched her fists. "No, but I can make sure he doesn't get away with it." Eli raised an eyebrow. "How?" Sophia's expression hardened. "By beating him at his own game." The rest of the night was spent planning. Sophia and Eli mapped out every detail, from gathering more evidence to deciding how to confront Damien without putting themselves in further danger. As dawn broke, Sophia looked at Eli, her resolve steely. "Are you sure you're up for this?" she asked. Eli grinned. "Are you kidding? This is the most fun I've had in years." Sophia shook her head, a reluctant smile playing on her lips. "You're insane." "Maybe," Eli said. "But so are you for trusting me." Sophia laughed, a genuine laugh this time. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone. But as they set their plan into motion, neither of them realized just how dangerous the road ahead would be. The city stirred as dawn broke, its streets buzzing with the energy of a new day. For Sophia and Eli, however, there was no time to bask in the morning calm. Their plan was ambitious, dangerous, and required precision. Sophia sat cross-legged on the motel room floor, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up files, sending encrypted messages, and diving into Damien's digital footprint. Eli, perched on the edge of the bed, watched her work with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "You're good at this," he said. Sophia didn't look up. "Years of managing Damien's affairs," she muttered. "He taught me how to handle accounts, track investments, cover my tracks. I guess he never expected me to use it against him." Eli grinned. "I like that, turning the villain's own tricks on him. Very poetic." Sophia shot him a glance. "This isn't a movie, Eli. If we mess this up, we're dead." The boy's grin faltered, and he nodded solemnly. Sophia turned back to the screen, her brows furrowed. "Okay," she said after a moment. "Here's the plan." They needed evidence. Solid, undeniable proof that Damien had ordered the hit. The email was a start, but it wasn't enough. Sophia suspected Damien would have encrypted messages, financial transactions, or even physical evidence stashed away somewhere. "We need access to his office," Sophia said. "His office?" Eli repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You mean the one in the high-security mansion where your psycho husband probably has cameras everywhere?" Sophia nodded. "That one." Eli groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "And here I thought breakfast was going to be the hardest part of my day." Sophia ignored him, her mind already spinning with possibilities. "Damien's always been paranoid, but he's predictable. If I can distract him long enough, I can get into his office." "And what am I supposed to do while you're playing Mission Impossible?" Eli asked. Sophia smiled faintly. "You'll be the distraction." Eli's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" They arrived at Damien's mansion just after midday. Sophia had parked several blocks away, leaving the car in an unassuming neighborhood to avoid suspicion. "Remember," she said as they approached the tall iron gates, "stick to the plan." Eli nodded, though his expression betrayed his nerves. "Stick to the plan. Right. No pressure." Sophia knelt in front of him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "You'll be fine," she said firmly. "You've already saved my life once. I trust you." Eli swallowed hard but managed a weak smile. "Okay, let's do this." Sophia pressed a button on the intercom. After a moment, a gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "Who is it?" "It's Sophia," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "Let me in." There was a pause, then a buzz as the gate swung open. They walked up the long driveway, the mansion looming like a fortress ahead of them. Eli couldn't help but gape at the sheer opulence. Marble columns, manicured gardens, a fountain that looked like it belonged in a museum. Rich people, he muttered under his breath. Sophia shot him a warning look. As they reached the front door, it opened to reveal Damien's head of security, a towering man with a shaved head and a no-nonsense expression. "Mrs. Gray," he said, his tone neutral. "Mr. Gray wasn't expecting you." "Of course he wasn't," Sophia replied smoothly. "I have urgent business with him." "Where is he?" The man hesitated, his eyes flicking to Eli. "And the boy?" Sophia's gaze didn't waver. "He's with me." The guard nodded reluctantly and stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Inside, the mansion was as grand and intimidating as Eli had imagined. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and priceless artwork lined the walls. "Wait here," the guard said, gesturing to a sitting room. Sophia nodded, but as soon as the guard was out of earshot, she turned to Eli. "You know what to do." Eli nodded, his heart pounding. He slipped out of the room and down a side hallway, moving as quietly as possible. His job was simple: create chaos. The more distracted the staff was, the easier it would be for Sophia to access Damien's office. Eli's first stop was the kitchen. He grabbed a bowl of fruit and dumped it on the floor, scattering apples and oranges everywhere. Then he knocked over a chair for good measure. Next, he found the laundry room. Spotting a shelf full of cleaning supplies, he grabbed a bottle of bleach and poured it into a nearby sink, creating a noxious, eye-watering smell. By the time he made it to the garage, the staff was already in a frenzy. He grinned as he spotted a car with its keys still in the ignition. "Perfect," he muttered. While Eli caused his chaos, Sophia made her way upstairs to Damien's office. She knew the layout of the mansion by heart, every room and hallway etched into her memory. Reaching the office door, she pulled a bobby pin from her hair and began picking the lock. It wasn't a skill she had ever thought she'd need, but desperation was a powerful teacher. The lock clicked open, and she slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The office was immaculate. Dark wood furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive desk that screamed wealth and power. Sophia wasted no time, heading straight for the desk and pulling open the drawers. Inside, she found files, receipts, and other documents that seemed innocuous at first glance. But as she sifted through them, patterns began to emerge. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and payments that matched the date of the hitman's email. "Got you," she whispered, snapping photos of everything with her phone. Her hands trembled as she opened the last drawer. Inside was a small black notebook, its pages filled with Damien's meticulous handwriting. The contents were chilling: names, dates, and notes about various problems Damien had handled over the years. Sophia's stomach turned. She had known Damien was ruthless, but this was something else entirely. She tucked the notebook into her bag, her heart racing. Just as she turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. Sophia froze, her mind racing. She couldn't be caught here, not with the evidence she'd just uncovered. Thinking quickly, she slipped into the closet, leaving the door open just a crack. The office door opened, and Damien's voice filled the room. "A mess downstairs. Find out what's going on," he barked, his tone sharp. Sophia held her breath, praying he wouldn't notice anything amiss. After what felt like an eternity, Damien left, slamming the door behind him. Sophia waited a moment longer, then slipped out of the closet and bolted for the hallway. By the time she reunited with Eli, the mansion was in chaos. Staff members shouted at one another, trying to clean up the mess he had made. "Ready?" Eli asked, grinning. Sophia nodded. "Let's get out of here." As they slipped out the front door and into the waiting car, Sophia felt a surge of triumph. She had the evidence she needed. But as they drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was just beginning. The sun was beginning to set by the time Sophia and Eli reached their next safe haven, a rundown motel on the outskirts of a neighboring city. The air smelled of mildew, and the neon vacancy sign outside flickered erratically. Sophia parked the car behind the building, out of sight, and led Eli inside. The room was sparse and cramped, but it would suffice. Eli flopped onto the bed, letting out a long sigh. Well, that was fun. Sophia shot him a look. You call that fun? Eli grinned. Come on, admit it. You felt alive back there. Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out her bag and placed the black notebook on the small table by the window. She stared at it, her mind replaying the events of the day. Do you think he knows? Eli asked, sitting up. Not yet, Sophia replied, her voice distant. But he will soon enough. Eli frowned. Then what's the plan? You've got the evidence. Why not just take it to the cops? Sophia hesitated. It's not that simple. Damien has connections everywhere. If I go to the wrong person, he'll know before I even leave the station. Eli nodded slowly. So what do we do? Sophia opened the notebook, flipping through its pages. We need to find someone we can trust. Someone with enough power to take Damien down without giving him a chance to retaliate. Great, Eli said. Any idea who that might be? Sophia didn't answer right away. She stared at the notebook, her mind racing. There was one name that stood out, Detective Marcus Haynes. Detective Marcus Haynes was a seasoned investigator with a reputation for being incorruptible. He had crossed paths with Damien before, though he had never been able to pin anything on him. Sophia had met Haynes once, years ago, at a charity gala. He had been polite but distant, his disdain for Damien barely concealed. If anyone can help us, it's him, Sophia said. Eli leaned back, crossing his arms. And what makes you think he won't sell us out? Sophia met his gaze, her expression resolute. Because he hates Damien as much as I do. They contacted Haynes through an encrypted messaging app, keeping the details vague. To Sophia's relief, he agreed to meet them at a diner outside the city. The diner was nearly empty when they arrived. Haynes sat in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and sharp, piercing eyes. Sophia Gray, he said as they approached. This is a surprise. Detective, Sophia replied, sliding into the booth across from him. Eli sat beside her, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Haynes's gaze shifted to Eli. And who's this? A friend, Sophia said quickly. Someone I trust. Haynes nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. All right, Mrs. Gray, what's this about? Sophia placed the black notebook on the table. This is what you've been looking for. Haynes raised an eyebrow. He opened the notebook, flipping through its pages. As he read, his expression darkened. This, he began, his voice low. This is enough to bury him. Sophia nodded. And I have more. Emails, financial records, but I need your help to use it. Damien will come after me the moment he realizes what I've done. Haynes closed the notebook, leaning back in his seat. You're right to be cautious. Damien Gray is a dangerous man. But this, he gestured to the notebook, is exactly what I've been waiting for. Eli shifted in his seat. So, what's the plan? Haynes glanced at him, then back at Sophia. First, we need to secure the evidence. If Damien finds out you have this, he'll stop at nothing to destroy it. And you. Sophia's stomach tightened. She had known the risk, but hearing it spelled out made it all the more real. Where do we take it? She asked. Haynes hesitated. I have a safe house outside the city. It's secure, off the grid. We can go there tonight. The drive to the safe house was tense. Sophia and Eli followed Haynes in their car, taking a winding route to avoid being followed. The safe house was a modest cabin nestled in a dense forest. It was isolated, the nearest neighbor miles away. Inside, Haynes set up a small workstation, spreading the evidence across a table. We'll need to organize this, catalog everything. If we're going to build a case against Damien, we can't leave any loose ends. Sophia nodded, though exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. She sank into a chair, her head in her hands. You okay? Eli asked, sitting beside her. I'm fine, she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. Eli frowned. You don't have to do this alone, you know. Sophia looked at him, her eyes glistening. Thank you, Eli, for everything. Eli shrugged, trying to hide his embarrassment. Don't mention it. As night fell, The cabin grew eerily quiet. Haynes was still poring over the evidence, muttering to himself as he worked. Sophia was about to suggest taking a break when a sudden noise outside made her freeze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Eli nodded, his eyes wide. Haynes grabbed a gun from a drawer, motioning for them to stay quiet. He moved to the window, peering into the darkness. A moment later, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the cabin. "They've found us!" Haynes hissed. Sophia's heart raced as footsteps approached. She grabbed Eli's hand, pulling him toward the back door. "We have to get out of here," she whispered. Haynes nodded. "Go. I'll hold them off." Sophia hesitated. "What about the evidence?" "I'll protect it," Haynes said. "Now go." Sophia and Eli bolted out the back door, disappearing into the woods. As they ran through the darkness, Sophia's mind raced. They had come so far, gathered so much, and now it was all at risk. "We'll be okay," Eli said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Sophia nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. For now, survival was all that mattered. The forest was dense, the trees casting long shadows under the moonlight. Sophia and Eli stumbled through the undergrowth, their breaths ragged and uneven. The sound of gunfire echoed faintly behind them, each shot sending a chill down Sophia's spine. "Keep moving," Sophia urged, pulling Eli along. Eli's legs burned, his heart pounding in his chest. "Where are we even going?" "Anywhere but here," Sophia replied. Her voice was tense, but her grip on Eli's hand was firm. The crunch of leaves behind them sent a surge of adrenaline through Sophia. She glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of shadowy figures weaving through the trees. "They're following us!" Eli shouted. Sophia tightened her grip on his hand. "Don't look back! Just run!" The pursuers were relentless, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. Sophia's mind raced, her survival instincts kicking into overdrive. Up ahead, the terrain sloped downward, leading to a narrow creek. Without hesitation, Sophia dragged Eli toward it. "Through the water," she whispered. "It'll mask our scent." Eli hesitated, his shoes already soaked from the muddy ground. "Are you sure about this?" "Do you have a better idea?" Sophia snapped. Eli shook his head and followed her into the icy creek. The cold water sent a shock through their bodies, but Sophia pushed forward, her determination outweighing her discomfort. They waded downstream, staying low to avoid being spotted. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers grew louder. "They went this way!" one of them shouted. Sophia's heart sank. They were getting closer. Just as Sophia began to lose hope, a faint light flickered in the distance. She squinted, her eyes adjusting to the dim glow. "It's a cabin," she whispered. Eli looked skeptical. "What if it's theirs?" Sophia hesitated. The risk was real, but they had no other options. "We'll have to take that chance." They scrambled up the creek bank and made their way toward the cabin. It was small and unassuming, its wooden exterior weathered by time. Sophia knocked on the door, her fists trembling. For a moment there was silence. Then the door creaked open to reveal an older man with a shotgun in hand. His weathered face was etched with suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded. "We need help," Sophia said quickly. "They're after us." The man's eyes narrowed. "Who's after you?" "There's no time to explain," Eli interjected. "Please, they're coming." The man hesitated, then gestured for them to come inside. The interior of the cabin was modest but warm. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The man introduced himself as Harold, a retired forest ranger who had chosen to live off the grid. "You've got trouble written all over you," Harold said, eyeing Sophia and Eli. "What did you do to piss off those goons?" "It's a long story," Sophia replied, glancing nervously at the door. Harold nodded, his expression grim. "Well, you're safe here for now. This place is hard to find unless you know where to look." Eli collapsed onto a worn couch, his body trembling from exhaustion. "Thank you," he muttered. Harold handed him a blanket. "Don't thank me yet, kid. If they're as determined as you say, they won't give up easily." Sophia sat by the fire, her mind racing. "Do you have a phone? Anything we can use to contact someone?" Harold shook his head. "No phone. Don't trust him. But I've got a radio. It's old, but it works." As Harold fiddled with the radio, Sophia tried to piece together their next move. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice low. Eli looked at her in disbelief. "Are you kidding? We just ran through a forest, almost froze in a creek, and now you want to leave?" Sophia met his gaze, her expression firm. "Damien won't stop until he finds us. If we stay, we're putting Harold in danger too." Harold glanced up from the radio. "She's right, kid, but I'll help you however I can." The radio crackled to life and Harold adjusted the frequency. "Who are you trying to reach?" Sophia hesitated. "A detective, Marcus Haynes. He was helping us before." Harold nodded and began scanning the channels. "If he's still out there, we'll find him." After several tense minutes, a familiar voice crackled through the radio. "Haynes here. Who is this?" Sophia grabbed the receiver. "Marcus, it's me, Sophia." There was a pause, then Haynes's voice returned, sharper this time. "Sophia, where are you? Are you safe?" "For now," she replied. "We're in a cabin in the forest. I have the evidence, but they're after us." Haynes's voice was laced with urgency. "Listen carefully. You need to get out of there. I've secured a team, but Damien's men are closing in. Can you make it to the old logging road? I'll have someone meet you there." Sophia glanced at Harold, who nodded. "We can make it," she said. "Good," Haynes replied. "Be careful. They're dangerous." Harold armed them with supplies, a flashlight, a map, and a hunting knife. "Stick to the trail," he advised. "It'll be faster." "Thank you," Sophia said, her voice filled with gratitude. Harold waved her off. "Just make it out alive." With the map in hand, Sophia and Eli set off into the night. The forest seemed even darker than before, the shadows closing in around them. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch, set their nerves on edge. "Do you think we'll make it?" Eli whispered. Sophia glanced at him, her jaw set. "We have to." As they neared the logging road, the sound of voices carried through the trees. "Search over there!" a man barked. Sophia pulled Eli behind a tree, her heart pounding. "They're close," she whispered. Eli's eyes were wide with fear. "What do we do?" Sophia gripped the hunting knife tightly. "We wait for an opening, then we run." The footsteps grew louder, the flashlights cutting through the darkness. Sophia held her breath, praying they wouldn't be seen. Just as one of the men passed by, a distant howl echoed through the forest. The man froze, his flashlight jerking toward the sound. "Wolves," another man muttered. The distraction was all Sophia needed. She grabbed Eli's hand and they bolted toward the logging road. They burst onto the gravel road, their lungs burning. A black SUV was parked nearby, its headlights off. The driver's side door opened and Haynes stepped out. "Get in," he shouted. Without hesitation, Sophia and Eli climbed into the car. As the SUV sped away, Sophia glanced back at the forest, the shadows swallowing the road behind them. They were safe, for now. The SUV barreled down the gravel road, its engine growling as Detective Haynes kept a sharp eye on the rearview mirror. Sophia and Eli sat in the back seat, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as the reality of their escape began to settle in. "Did anyone follow you?" Haynes asked, his voice low but tense. "No," Sophia said, glancing nervously out the window. "At least, I don't think so." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "They're not just going to stop. Damien's got resources. He'll find us." Haynes tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "That's why we're not stopping either." As the SUV approached the highway, headlights appeared in the distance, closing in fast. Sophia's stomach dropped as she recognized the sleek black cars, Damien's men. "They found us!" she shouted. Haynes didn't hesitate. He swerved off the road, cutting through a field, the SUV bouncing violently over the uneven terrain. "Hold on!" he barked. The black cars pursued, their engines roaring. Gunshots rang out, shattering the back window. Sophia ducked instinctively, her heart racing. "They're trying to take us out!" Eli yelled, clutching the door handle. Haynes gritted his teeth. "Not if I can help it." He veered sharply toward a narrow trail that led into a dense forest. The black cars hesitated, their drivers weighing the risk of following. Haynes used the moment to his advantage, accelerating into the trees and disappearing from sight. The SUV finally came to a halt in a secluded clearing. Haynes killed the engine, and the group sat in silence, the tension thick in the air. "Is everyone okay?" Haynes asked, turning to look at them. Sophia nodded, though her hands were still shaking. "We can't keep running like this. We need to strike back." Haynes leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. We have enough evidence to take Damien down, but we need to hit him where it hurts." "And where's that?" Eli asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "His public image," Haynes replied. "Damien thrives on his reputation. If we expose him, the walls will start to crumble." The group moved to a nearby abandoned cabin Haynes had scouted earlier. Inside, they spread out their evidence, reviewing every detail of Damien's operations. Sophia pointed to a list of offshore accounts. "This shows where he's laundering money. If we leak this, it'll raise enough suspicion to get the authorities involved." Haynes nodded. "We can also use these photos." He held up surveillance images of Damien meeting with known criminals. "This will tarnish his reputation further." Eli, who had been quiet, spoke up. "What about the people he's hurt? We could find someone willing to testify." Sophia hesitated. "That's risky. Damien has a way of silencing people." Haynes agreed. "We'll need to protect anyone who comes forward, but it's worth considering." Later that night, Sophia made a call to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Rebecca Vaughn, an investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption. Rebecca had once been a close friend, but their relationship had soured after Sophia married Damien. To Sophia's surprise, Rebecca answered immediately. "Sophia, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I need your help," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "It's about Damien." Rebecca's tone shifted, becoming serious. "Go on." Sophia explained everything, the evidence, the threats, and their plan to expose Damien. By the time she finished, Rebecca was silent. "Why now?" Rebecca finally asked. "Because I can't let him keep hurting people," Sophia replied. "And I can't do this alone." Rebecca sighed. "All right, send me what you have. I'll start digging." With Rebecca on board, the group launched the first phase of their plan, leaking a small but damning piece of evidence to the media. It was a calculated move designed to create suspicion without revealing their full hand. Within hours, the news was everywhere. Headlines screamed about Damien's alleged connections to criminal organizations, and social media buzzed with speculation. Sophia watched the coverage from the cabin, her heart pounding. "This is just the beginning," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Eli glanced at her. "Do you think it'll work?" Sophia nodded. "It has to." The leak had the desired effect. Damien's public image took a hit, and his business partners began to distance themselves. But it also painted a target on Sophia and her allies. It wasn't long before Damien made his move. He released a statement denying the allegations, portraying himself as a victim of a smear campaign. At the same time, he sent his men to track down the source of the leak. Sophia's phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "They're digging. Be careful." Sophia showed the message to Haynes. "We need to move faster." Haynes nodded. "Agreed. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes." The group decided to escalate their efforts. They coordinated with Rebecca to release more damning evidence, this time tying Damien directly to several illegal activities. The fallout was immediate. Protests erupted outside Damien's offices demanding accountability. Reporters hounded him at every turn, their questions growing sharper and more relentless. But Damien wasn't going down without a fight. He doubled his efforts to find Sophia, offering a hefty reward for any information on her whereabouts. One night, as Sophia and Eli were reviewing their next steps, Haynes burst into the room. "We've got a problem," he said, his face pale. "What is it?" Sophia asked, dread creeping into her voice. "They've traced one of the leaks back to Rebecca." Sophia's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means she's in danger," Haynes said. "We need to get to her before Damien does." Without hesitation, the group packed their things and set out for Rebecca's location. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. As they sped toward the city, Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of Damien's retaliation. "We'll get to her," Haynes said, as if reading her thoughts. "We won't let him win." Sophia nodded, though her grip on the seat tightened. She could only hope they weren't too late. The city was alive with lights, the streets bustling even in the dead of night. The group's nerves were stretched thin as Haynes drove with an urgency that matched their mounting fear. Every turn felt like a countdown to something they couldn't predict. "Keep your heads down," Haynes instructed, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "Damien's men could be anywhere." Sophia clenched her jaw, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The leak had triggered an avalanche, and now they were caught in the middle of it. Every decision they made felt like a gamble, and they could only hope they were playing the right hand. They pulled into an alley near Rebecca's apartment, the SUV's headlights flickering briefly before they cut the engine. Sophia looked out the window, her heart racing. "This is it," she muttered under her breath, knowing that everything they'd worked for had led to this moment. As they stepped out of the vehicle, the sound of footsteps behind them sent a chill through their spines. Haynes motioned for them to stay quiet and low. Sophia's mind raced as they quickly ducked into the shadows, the footsteps drawing closer. Eli's breathing grew more erratic, and Sophia could feel the anxiety building in her chest. "Damien's men," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. "Could be," Haynes replied, his hand hovering near the concealed gun under his jacket. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, and Sophia's heart skipped a beat. But it wasn't one of Damien's men. It was Rebecca. "Get inside!" she hissed, rushing toward them with hurried steps. Sophia didn't hesitate. She grabbed Eli's hand, pulling him toward Rebecca's apartment door. They entered quickly, the door shutting behind them with a soft click. Rebecca wasted no time, locking the door and drawing the curtains. "Is it clear?" Haynes asked, his voice low but firm. Rebecca nodded, though there was a hard edge to her features. "For now, but we don't have much time. Damien knows everything. His people are closing in on me." Sophia stared at Rebecca, her thoughts swirling. "How much does he know?" Rebecca paused for a moment, biting her lip. "He knows about the leaks. He knows you're involved, Sophia. He's not going to let this go." Rebecca moved to the small table in the corner of her living room, her eyes flicking to the stack of papers she'd been working on. "I've been digging into Damien's past. There's more than just money laundering, Sophia. He's been involved in some seriously shady stuff: organ trafficking, blackmail, bribery. He's been using his power to manipulate people into silence." Sophia felt a wave of nausea hit her. "I should have known." "No one did," Rebecca said, her voice softer now. "Not even me. I was blind to it. Damien was always so charming, so persuasive. But behind the facade, he's a monster." Sophia swallowed hard, fighting the tears threatening to overwhelm her. "What now? We can't keep running. We need to expose him for good." Rebecca hesitated. "The only way we can do that now is by going public. Everything. Every detail. Every crime. We take everything we've gathered and release it all at once. No more secrets." Eli looked at the others, his face pale. "Are we really ready for this?" Sophia took a deep breath. "We don't have a choice. If we don't do it now, Damien will destroy everyone in his path." They spent the next several hours preparing, going over their strategy one last time. The evidence had been compiled: photos, recordings, bank statements, and Rebecca was ready to release it all to the public. Sophia glanced at the clock, her fingers twitching nervously as she checked her phone again. They'd done everything they could to keep themselves hidden, but they were well aware that the next few hours would determine their fate. "There's no turning back now," Haynes said, breaking the silence. "We make our move, and we do it hard." Rebecca stood up, gathering her laptop and preparing the final files. "I'll send everything to the media outlets and the authorities. Once they get this, there's no way Damien can wriggle out of it." Sophia's mind was racing. "Are you sure it's enough?" Rebecca met her gaze. "It's more than enough. This is the kind of information that'll make him a target. And once people start talking, there's no way he can suppress it." Eli exhaled slowly. "And then what? Do we just wait for it all to blow over?" "No," Haynes replied. "We stay ahead of him. We make sure there's no way he can retaliate." Sophia wasn't convinced. Damien had always been one step ahead of everyone, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could bring him down. The hours ticked by. As soon as Rebecca hit send, the weight of their actions became undeniable. Sophia's phone buzzed with notifications, news outlets, social media, and messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. The leaks were everywhere. By the time the first headline appeared on her screen, her breath caught in her throat. Millionaire business tycoon Damien Riker linked to international crime ring. Ex-wife's revelations spark public outcry. The story was gaining traction fast. The media was relentless, sharing every detail, from the illegal operations to the evidence of bribery, human trafficking, and more. It was all coming to light. Eli turned to her. "It's happening. He can't stop it now." Sophia nodded, but the relief was short-lived. The phone buzzed again and Sophia's heart skipped a beat. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? You've only just begun. I'll make you regret this." Sophia's blood ran cold. The message was unmistakable. Damien was watching. As the world turned its eyes on Damien, his empire began to crumble. But Sophia knew they weren't out of the woods yet. Damien was a man of power, and he would stop at nothing to protect his interests. With every news story, with every leak, he fought back harder. His lawyers filed defamation suits, his men searched for Sophia, and his influence over the media began to create doubt. But this time, they weren't backing down. Rebecca continued to release more evidence, and as the pressure mounted, the walls around Damien's empire began to crack. He had underestimated the people he'd hurt, and now they were rising against him. Sophia stared at the screen, watching the final pieces fall into place. The end was near for Damien, but the question remained. Would they survive the fallout? The following weeks were a blur of media frenzy, legal battles, and escalating tension. The story of Damien Riker's fall from grace spread like wildfire, becoming the scandal of the year. Sophia and her team watched, sometimes in disbelief, as every piece of evidence they had gathered was meticulously laid bare for the world to see. The news outlets, social media, and authorities were relentless. It seemed that no corner of Damien's empire was left untouched, but even as his empire crumbled, Damien was not ready to give up. He had always been a fighter, a man who could manipulate the media, bend the law, and silence anyone who got in his way. This time, however, it was different. The stakes were higher, and Sophia wasn't the same woman he had once controlled. Damien had anticipated public backlash, but the force of the revelations shook him to his core. The people who had once worshipped him now turned against him. Former allies betrayed him, and his business partners jumped ship. His wealth and influence, which had once seemed impenetrable, began to dissolve. But Damien wasn't done yet. He had one final card to play, his last-ditch attempt to regain control. Through his network of loyalists and shadowy associates, Damien orchestrated a counterattack. The courts became a battleground, with his lawyers filing injunction after injunction. False accusations surfaced, claiming that Sophia and her allies had fabricated the evidence to destroy him. The media, still hungry for the next sensational story, hesitated. Some questioned the authenticity of the evidence, creating just enough doubt to keep the public divided. Sophia and her team had anticipated that Damien would strike back hard, but the sudden escalation of his power was alarming. Haynes, who had been coordinating their efforts from the shadows, became increasingly concerned. "They're trying to turn the tables on us," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "We've done everything by the book, but now they're calling the evidence fake, claiming we've doctored it." Sophia clenched her fists. "I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I didn't expect it to be like this." Rebecca, who had been keeping tabs on the media, added, "The courts will take time to sort it out, but in the meantime, we need to push harder. If we don't expose him completely now, we risk losing all the progress we've made." As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that Damien was getting closer. Closer to her, closer to her team, closer to the truth they had worked so hard to expose. The walls were closing in. One evening, while reviewing the latest news updates in her hotel room, Sophia received another ominous message from an unknown number. Your game's over. You're nothing but a pawn. Watch your back. Her pulse quickened as she read the words, fear creeping into her thoughts. This wasn't just a message from Damien's lawyers or media handlers. It was a direct threat. She immediately showed it to Haynes. We need to be ready, Haynes said, his face grim. He won't stop until he's destroyed everything we've built. He's playing for keeps now. Sophia knew he was right, but there was no turning back. Not now. She wasn't about to let Damien's darkness win. The breakthrough they had been waiting for came when one of Damien's former associates, a man named Robert Vasquez, reached out to them. Vasquez was a middle-level executive who had worked under Damien for years. He had been involved in several of the illegal activities Damien had orchestrated, and now, with everything unraveling, he was looking for a way out. I know where all the bodies are buried, Vasquez said, his voice tense over the phone. I can give you everything you need to make sure Damien never walks free again. But I need protection. He won't let me testify without retaliation. Sophia was skeptical. Why should we trust you? I don't have a choice, Vasquez replied, desperation clear in his tone. I've watched Damien destroy everyone who's ever tried to stand up to him. But he's too powerful now. He'll come after me next if I don't cooperate. Rebecca, who had been listening in, exchanged a glance with Sophia. We don't have a lot of time. If he's telling the truth, this could be the key to finally taking Damien down. Sophia hesitated. The risk was enormous. If they trusted Vasquez, they were exposing themselves even further to Damien's wrath. But they had no choice. All right, Sophia said finally. We'll help you. But you need to be sure you're ready to give everything. Vasquez's testimony, combined with the evidence they had already gathered, created an airtight case. He revealed the inner workings of Damien's empire, naming names, locations, and even providing financial records that traced illegal deals back to the highest levels. But even with the new information, Sophia knew Damien was not the type to go down without a fight. As they prepared to release the final piece of evidence, the pressure became unbearable. Every move they made was watched, and they could feel the tension in the air. The final confrontation with Damien was approaching. Sophia could feel it in her bones. That night, after a tense meeting with Rebecca and Haynes, they made their final decision. The time had come to expose everything. The truth, raw and unfiltered, would be released to the public. Sophia, Haynes, and Rebecca stood together in the small, dimly lit room where their final strategy meeting had taken place. The room was filled with papers, computers, and legal documents. The evidence had been sorted, reviewed, and now it was time to let it all go. This is it, Haynes said, his voice calm but heavy. Once this is out there, there's no turning back. Sophia took a deep breath. She had thought of nothing else for days, weeks even. She had spent every waking moment preparing for this. But now, with the click of a button, the truth would be out there for the world to see. Rebecca opened her laptop. I'm sending it now. Sophia's pulse raced as she watched Rebecca click send. The final release of Damien's darkest secrets went live. Immediately, the world reacted. Social media exploded with outrage. The news networks picked up the story, and the authorities began their investigation into Damien's illegal operations. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a movement. People rallied behind Sophia and her team, and the calls for justice became deafening. In the midst of the chaos, Damien made his final move. Desperate and cornered, he made a last-ditch attempt to escape the consequences of his actions. He tried to flee the country, but the authorities were already one step ahead. As the net closed in on him, his empire crumbled. The story of Damien Riker's downfall became legendary. The once powerful millionaire was arrested, his assets frozen, and his criminal activities exposed to the world. But for Sophia, the victory was bittersweet. She had achieved what she set out to do. She had stopped Damien. But in the process, she had lost so much. Her marriage, her trust in people, and her sense of safety had all been shattered. But as she stood in front of the press, the weight of her journey behind her, she knew one thing for certain. She had won. She had fought for justice and had seen it through. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Months later, Sophia sat in a small cafe, sipping her coffee. The world had moved on from Damien Riker's scandal, but for her, life was slowly returning to normal. She had learned to rebuild her life, without fear, without the man who had once controlled it. She was stronger now, and though the scars of her past would never fully fade, she had come out on top. Damien had been brought to justice, and the people he had hurt could now begin to heal. As she looked out the window, a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It had been a long, painful journey, but she had won the fight of her life, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing. I put a lot of time into crafting these heartfelt narratives, and your support means the world. Thank you for being part of this journey.